Welcome to another AGS tutorial. This tutorial will be about the timer components. I realized while recording the last tutorial that we need a specific tutorial for timer components. So here it is. I've created a firework here in the scene that we will use timer components to launch in the sky and then explode. Timer components are not they are not dependent on the game manager of AGS, so they can reside anywhere in the scene, and that's why I created it here in the root, much like the action list example and the action property example. The firework itself has a rigid body and a base and a head, and the head has an afterburner that I simply took from the standard assets of Unity, and I also created an explosion prefab here that we will use later, also using the standard assets. So let's begin by creating a script here. And the whole tutorial will just end up with one script, so we call it firework, a C# script, create and add, and we open it up in Visual Studio Code. Here we go, so we can get rid of, we can get rid of the update method, and let's get rid of this comment also, annoying comment, and we won't be using collections, but we will be using AGS core.classes.mono extensions for adding the timer components, and also we will be using the timer components. So core classes timer components. And that's all we need, and let's declare some variables. We need a reference to the rigid body, and we also need a reference to the particle systems for the afterburner, so we can start and stop them. So private particle system, an array of those. There we go. Let's call them particle systems. And also we need a reference to the explosion prefab, so public object explode prefab, and also we need two floats here to determine when to launch and when to explode. So launch in seconds, let's default it to 2, and public float explode in seconds, and let's also default that to 2. Then we quickly get the references, or set them rather. Rigid get component rigid body, and then we do particle systems, IntelliSense is really slow. Particle systems, get components in children, particle system, That should get us all the particle systems of the afterburner. And we start by deactivating those. So we do for each our system in particle systems. We simply do system dot enable, what's it called, enable trans, it should be called enable trans, oh sorry, that's a capital S there, enable trans, I think it's called enable transmission. Transmission equals, for some reason it's a capital S there again. Enable transmission equals to false. I see where the problem is. For each, there we go. Hopefully it will go away. Enable, what's it called then? Enable emission. Enable emission. Okay. And then let's create the first timer components, which will be the rocket updater. Now, timer components are mainly divided into two different types of components. The first one is the update components, which is basically used for temporary updates. Say if you want to have an update when specific conditions are met in your game, but never else. Then it's better to use a temporary component and use the update only when you need to. And the other type of timer components is simply timers, or one-shot timers, or repeating timers that invokes a method within a certain time interval. But you'll see when we start typing here. So the first one is a rocket updater and of the update type. So var rocket updater equals to component extensions. That's within the Moon extensions namespace. We do setup component. And here we use update persistent game object. The difference between temporary game object or persistent game object is that if you use the temporary game object, it will create a new game object, place the component on it, and when the timer is done, it will delete the whole game object. For this persistent game object, we simply add a new component in this case, directly on the firework. And we won't start it before we have launched. So why is it? Are we missing something here? We shouldn't. Game object. Oh yeah. OmniSharp is really slow, that's why we get these type of errors. So var explode timer, and this will be of another type, component extensions, and this time we add component on an empty child because we are going to use a temporary timer. Temporary timer temporary game object, and here we need to specify where to put it, so we put it on the game object, and we call it explode timer. So what this does is that it creates a new game object as a child of the the firework. We do explode timer dot timer method. This defines what to run when the timer executes, equals to an anonymous function. There we go. The first thing we want to do here is when we explode, we want the rocket updater that we created before. When we explode, it should stop updating, and we do this by running the stop method. And after that we do for each, we can copy paste this. We need to stop all the particle systems of the afterburner. No, actually we can destroy them here. Destroy system, because the rocket explodes, so we won't be... Okay, my laptop ran out of use, but I'm back, and yeah, we just decided to destroy the particle systems when the rocket explodes, and after that we want to instantiate the explosion prefab. So first we check if the explode prefab, if it's equal to null, then we can return here, because then we won't have anything to instantiate. So we do var explosion particles equals to instantiate explode prefab, and we want to create it where the the firework is, so transform position, and we can use quaternion identity as the rotation identity. There we go, and we instantiate this as a game object. Now we also need to check if the explosion particles is null. So if explosion particles equals to null, then we return. Otherwise we continue, and then we do explosion particles set active true, and that's all we need to do with the explosion particles. And now we need the last timer, which is the launch timer, and it will be similar to the explode timer, so I'm going to copy paste a little here. It's a timer temporary game object, like the explode timer. I hope I won't get any copy paste errors here. So best way to make sure of that is to delete everything. And this one we can start by setting the invoke when to launch. So launch timer invoke. This is similar to the Unity invoke, except that it's completely type safe, and you can use parameters. You can use basically anything you want within the timer method here. But let's do launch in seconds. And what do we do here? Well, the first thing we want to do is we want to activate the rocket updater, so it launches the rocket into the sky. So we do rocket updater. We define the update method of it, and we will be adding a force to the rigid body to launch the rigid body to the sky. So we do rigid body, add force, and we want to launch it. Let's just launch it straight up, vector 3 up, times, I don't know, 50 something. Should be good, perhaps. And then we want to activate the afterburner so that it looks very cool when it flies into the sky also. Equals to true. And last but not least, we want to set the invoke of when to explode. So explode timer dot invoke in explode in seconds, and we are ready to test this. So we need to add firework script to the firework, and we need to set the firework explosion as the explode prefab, and let's try it out. It sits there and then it launches. Okay, missing component exception. There is no rigid body attached to the afterburner. I accidentally attached the firework to the afterburner instead of the base game object. Let's try it again. And there it goes. Yeah, we saw some debris there, but we can do, and we zoom out a bit so we can watch it in the editor at least when it explodes. There it goes. It exploded a bit too fast there. Explode in seconds. Let me check and I'll be right back. Okay, so I had accidentally added 2 firework scripts to the firework game object. I have fixed that and created a little fireworks display here in the scene, and it looks like this. There is explosion script added to explosion standard asset, and that's what's pushing the fireworks aside when they explode. But that's okay. That's it for this tutorial, and see you in the next one.